Introduction. Zara Keen strode confidently through the halls of the Galactic Academy, her human heritage standing out amidst the colorful menagerie of alien students. As one of the few humans admitted to the prestigious institution, Zara faced constant scrutiny from her extraterrestrial classmates. She entered the lecture hall for her xenobiology class, the cacophony of clicking, whirring, and chirping that served as the native tongues of a dozen alien races filled the air. Professor Xyloth, a spindly insectoid with compound eyes that shimmered like opals, called the class to order. "Attention, students," Xyloth clicked. "Today we will be studying the fascinating adaptations of the Krillian Deathmaw, a predator native to." A deafening klaxon cut through the lecture hall, red emergency lights pulsing in time with the urgent alarms. Xyloth's antennae twitched in alarm. "This is not a drill," a synthesized voice announced over the intercom. "Containment breach in Xenobiology Lab 3. Deadly specimens have escaped. Initiate emergency protocols immediately." The lecture hall erupted into chaos as the diverse student body processed the news according to their species' instincts. Some stampeded for the exits, others curled into defensive postures, and a few simply shut down in terror. Zara, however, remained calm. On Earth, crises were part of daily life. Humanity's tenacity in the face of adversity was legendary, earning them the moniker Deathworlders from the galactic community. "Everyone, stop," Zara shouted, her powerful human vocals cutting through the disorder. "Panicking won't help. We need to fortify this room, now, if we want to survive." Lockdown. Under Zara's direction, the once panicked students began transforming the classroom into a fortress. Desks were upturned and stacked against the doors, forming makeshift barricades. Bioluminescent Zathian students used their natural light to illuminate the room after Zara instructed Grolkit, a burly reptilian, to smash the light panels, denying any outside visibility into their refuge. Zara surveyed her classmates, recognizing the untapped potential in their diverse abilities. "All right, listen up," she said. "Assuming the mantle of leadership, we're going to be relying on each other to get through this. It's time to prove what you're made of." She turned to the insectoid students, distant relatives of Professor Xyloth. "Your exoskeletons are tough, and you can scale walls. I need you to reinforce any weak points and seal the vents." The insectoids chirped affirmatively, scuttling up the walls to carry out Zara's orders. Next, she approached the gelatinous blobarians. "Your kind can alter your molecular density. Can you fill any gaps in our barricades?" The blobarians quivered in agreement, oozing into the cracks and solidifying, creating an airtight seal. Zara then called upon the telekinetic Synovus to create force fields around the room's perimeter as a final line of defense. As the students worked together, the gravity of their situation began to sink in. The escaped creatures were no mere lab specimens. They were apex predators, each carefully studied for their lethal capabilities. Professor Xyloth, visibly shaken, approached Zara. "Human," he clicked softly, "I must commend your quick thinking. Without your decisive action, we might already be lost." Zara nodded, a flicker of pride sparking within her. "We're not out of the woods yet, Professor. But if there's one thing humans know, it's how to fight for survival. We'll make it through this together." As if on cue, a chilling howl echoed through the halls, followed by the sound of skittering claws on metal. The creatures were on the hunt, and the students of xenobiology were their prey. Creature assault. The first wave of creatures slammed into the classroom's barricades, the force of the impact sending shudders through the makeshift fortifications. Zara recognized the attackers from her studies. Krillian Deathmaws, vicious pack hunters with razor-sharp claws and venomous fangs. "Hold the line," Zara shouted, bracing herself against a desk. The Synovas strained to maintain their telekinetic barriers, sweat beading on their brows from the mental exertion. As the Deathmaws continued their relentless assault, Zara realized that defense alone wouldn't be enough. They needed to go on the offensive. Grolkit, She called to the reptilian student. Your species can spit corrosive venom, right? I need you to target their eyes, blind them. Grolkit nodded, his scaled lips curling into a determined snarl. He took position near a small gap in the barricade, waiting for a death maw to draw near. As a creature's snapping jaws appeared, Grolkit let loose a stream of noxious green liquid, eliciting a pained howl as the death maw reeled back, clawing at its sizzling eyes. Emboldened by Grolkit's success, Zara turned to the Voltarians, eel-like beings who could generate powerful electrical currents. We need to create a shock barrier. Can you link up and generate a current across the barricades? The Voltarians crackled with energy, slithering into position. As they touched the metal desks, sparks flew, and a humming field of electricity encased the classroom. The next death maw to touch the barricade let out a yelp as the current coursed through its body, sending it skittering away in pain. As the students worked together, utilizing their unique abilities to repel the creatures, a sense of camaraderie began to grow. Species who had once eyed each other with suspicion now fought side by side, united in their struggle for survival. Zara felt a swell of pride as she watched her classmates rise to the challenge. The Galactic Academy had brought them together to learn, but now they were forging bonds stronger than any lecture could provide. But even as they celebrated each small victory, Zara knew that the real test was yet to come. The escaped creatures were many, and the students were few. They would need more than just defensive tactics to survive the long haul. They needed a plan. Dwindling supplies. As the siege wore on, the adrenaline that had fueled the students' initial defense began to ebb, replaced by a gnawing hunger and parched throats. The classroom's meager supplies of snacks and drinks, scrounged from backpacks and desks, dwindled with each passing hour. Zara, her own stomach growling, knew that they couldn't hold out much longer without sustenance. She gathered the students, her brow furrowed with determination. "We need to make a supply run," she announced. "There's a cafeteria 2 halls down. If we can get there and back, we might be able to outlast these things." Professor Xylot's antennae twitched in agitation. "It's too dangerous," he clicked. "The creatures are still out there. We can't risk it." But Zara was resolute. "If we stay here, we'll starve. I'm going, and I need volunteers to come with me." To her surprise, several students stepped forward. Grolkit, a Cynova named Zephyr, and a lithe feline-like Philidian named Nyx. Zara nodded, a flicker of hope kindling in her chest. "The rest of you, keep the barricade strong. We'll be back as soon as we can." With that, Zara and her team slipped out of the classroom, creeping silently through the eerily quiet halls. The once bustling academy now felt like a tomb, the only sounds being the distant skittering of claws and the pounding of their own hearts. As they neared the cafeteria, a blood-chilling screech pierced the air. A pair of death maws emerged from the shadows, their eyes glinting with predatory hunger. Nyx hissed, her fur standing on end, while Grolkit dropped into a combat stance. Zara, however, remained calm. She had noticed a fire extinguisher on the wall, and an idea formed in her mind. "Zephyr," she whispered, "can you lift that extinguisher with your telekinesis?" The Cynova nodded, his eyes glowing as he focused his mental energy. The extinguisher trembled, then rose into the air. Zara grabbed it, aiming the nozzle at the advancing death moss. "Cover your ears," she warned, before squeezing the trigger. A blast of compressed CO2 shot forth, engulfing the creatures in a cloud of icy mist. The death maws howled in confusion and pain, their thermal vision obscured by the cold. "Now, run," Zara shouted, leading her team in a mad dash past the disoriented predators and into the cafeteria. They quickly gathered as much food and water as they could carry, stuffing their bags to the brim. But as they turned to leave, a piercing cry cut through the air. Nyx crumpled to the ground, a death maw's venomous fang embedded in her leg. Grolkit charged forward with a roar, grappling with the creature as Zara and Zephyr rushed to Nyx's side. The Philidian's breaths came in shallow gasps, her eyes glazed with pain. "We have to get her back to the classroom," Zora said, her voice tight with fear and determination. "Zephyr, can you levitate her?" The Psi Nova, his face pale with strain, managed to nod. Nyx's body rose into the air, and the group began their desperate retreat, Grolkit taking up the rear to fend off any pursuing deathmoths. As they stumbled back into the classroom, Nyx's limp form floating behind them, a hush fell over the other students. Professor Zoloth scuttled forward, his compound eyes wide with concern. "She needs medical attention," Zora said, her voice cracking. "Does anyone have any first aid training?" A slender crystalline being named Prism stepped forward. "I have some knowledge," they chimed. "In my species, we can regenerate damaged tissue. Perhaps I can help." As Prism tended to Nyx's wound, the other students divided the scavenged supplies, the gravity of their situation settling over them like a lead weight. They had survived another day, but at what cost? Zara, exhausted and heart-sore, leaned against the barricade. They couldn't keep going like this, scrabbling for scraps and barely staying one step ahead of the creatures. They needed a way out, a way to fight back, and she was determined to find it. The final stand. In the dim light of the classroom, Zora pored over the notes she'd scribbled in the margins of her xenobiology textbook. The survivalist training her parents insisted upon back on Earth had seemed excessive then. Now it was their lifeline. Her finger traced a hastily sketched diagram of the xenobiology lab's layout. If they could just reach the main control room, they might be able to activate the lab's containment protocols, trapping the creatures inside. It was a desperate plan, but desperation was all they had left. Zara gathered the students once more, Nyx limping to join the circle, her wound bandaged, but far from healed. The Philidian's eyes burned with a fierce determination, refusing to be sidelined. "We can't stay here," Zara began, her voice steady despite the fear churning in her gut. "The creatures are getting bolder, and our defenses won't hold forever. We need to end this, and I think I know how." She laid out her plan, watching as the faces around her cycled through disbelief, fear, and finally, resolute acceptance. They knew, as she did, that this was their only chance. "It won't be easy," Zora admitted, "and I can't guarantee that we'll all make it back. But if we work together, if we trust in each other, I believe we can do this." One by one, the students nodded, a fierce solidarity taking root among them. They were no longer just classmates. They were a team, forged in the crucible of shared adversity. As they prepared for their final stand, Zara felt a hand on her shoulder. It was Professor Zoloth, his compound eyes shimmering with emotion. "I have never been more proud," he clicked softly, "to see my students, of all species, unite like this. It gives me hope for the future of the galaxy." Zara nodded, a lump forming in her throat. "We'll make you proud, Professor. I promise." With their plan in place, the students set their trap. The Blobarians oozed out from the barricades, forming a viscous trail leading from the classroom deeper into the lab. The scent of their pheromones would draw the creatures like moths to a flame. Zara, Grolkit, Nyx, and a handful of other volunteers took up positions along the route, ready to spring the ambush. The rest stayed behind to mount a final defense, should the worst happen. They didn't have to wait long. The Deathmoths, frenzied by hunger and the tantalizing scent of the Blobarians, charged into the trap, their claws skittering against the metal floor. Zara gave the signal, and chaos erupted. The Voltarians unleashed crackling bolts of electricity, stunning the creatures as they passed. Grolkit and his fellow venom spitters blinded and burned the Deathmoths, while the Psi-Novas used their telekinesis to slam them against the walls. But the creatures kept coming, wave after relentless wave. Zara, her heart pounding, led the retreat towards the control room. They were so close, the door just yards away, when a massive Deathmoth, twice the size of the others, burst from the shadows. It lunged at Zara, its jaws wide and dripping with venom. Time seemed to slow as Zara raised her makeshift spear, bracing for the impact. But the blow never came. Nyx, in a blur of fur and claws, leaped in front of Zara, taking the brunt of the Deathma's attack. The Philidian and the creature tumbled to the ground, locked in a deadly embrace. Nyx, Zara screamed, her voice raw with anguish. But there was no time to help her friend. The control room was just ahead, and with it their only hope of survival. With a final, desperate push, Zara and the remaining students burst into the room. Grolkit and Zephyr barred the door, buying them precious seconds as Zara rushed to the console. Her fingers flew over the unfamiliar controls, searching for the containment protocol. Behind her, the door shuddered under the weight of the creatures throwing themselves against it. "Come on, come on," Zara muttered, sweat beading on her brow. And then a flashing red button caught her eye. Containment breach. Emergency lockdown. Without hesitation, she slammed her palm down on the button. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, with a deafening clang, metal barriers slammed down over the lab's exits, trapping the Deathma's inside. The creatures howled and scrabbled at the unyielding barriers, but it was no use. They were contained, and the students were safe. Zara slumped against the console, exhaustion and grief crashing over her in equal measure. They had won, but at a terrible cost. Resolution. The aftermath of the containment breach was a blur of medical teams, security personnel, and endless debriefings. Zara and her fellow survivors were hailed as heroes, their bravery and ingenuity praised by the Academy's leadership. But for Zara, the accolades felt hollow. Nyx, her friend and savior, had not survived her wounds. The Philidian sacrifice weighed heavily on Zara's heart, a grief shared by all who had fought alongside her. Professor Zylov, battered but alive, had insisted on a memorial service for Nyx. The entire academy gathered to pay their respects, the normally bustling halls somber and still. As Zara stood before the assembled students and faculty, she struggled to find the words to express what Nyx had meant to her, to all of them. Nyx was more than just a classmate, Zara began, her voice trembling with emotion. She was a friend, a warrior, and a true hero. She gave her life so that we might live, and that is a debt we can never repay. Zara paused, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. But we can honor her sacrifice. We can remember the courage and compassion she showed in the face of unimaginable danger. And we can strive to be more like her, to put the needs of others before our own. As Zara spoke, she saw nods of agreement and tears of shared grief among the gathered students. The once disparate races were united now, bound by the horrors they had faced and the losses they had suffered. Nyx's legacy will live on, Zara continued, not just in our memories, but in the bonds we have forged. We came to this academy as strangers, but we leave as family. And that is a testament to the strength and resilience of all sentient beings, no matter their origin. As the memorial concluded, Zara found herself surrounded by her fellow survivors. Grolkit, his scales still bearing the scars of battle, clasped her shoulder with a clawed hand. "You led us through hell, Zara," he said, his voice a low rumble. "We wouldn't have made it without you." Zephyr, the Psi Nova, nodded in agreement. "You showed us what it means to be a leader, to put others before yourself. We are in your debt." Zara shook her head, a sad smile on her face. "We all played our part. We survived because we worked together, because we trusted in each other's strengths." As the students dispersed, Professor Zylov approached Zara, his compound eyes glinting with pride and sorrow. "Nyx would be proud of you, Zara," he clicked softly. "As am I. You have shown the galaxy what humanity is capable of, and that is no small feat." Zara nodded, her throat tight with emotion. "Thank you, Professor, for everything." In the days that followed, life at the academy slowly returned to normal. Classes resumed, and students fell back into their routines. But something had changed, an invisible yet unbreakable thread connecting those who had survived the containment breach. Zara found herself at the center of this new dynamic, a leader not by choice but by necessity. Her fellow students looked to her for guidance and strength, and she did her best to provide it. But in the quiet moments, when the weight of all they had endured threatened to overwhelm her, Zara found solace in the memories of those they had lost. Nyx's bravery, Professor Zyloth's wisdom, and the countless acts of heroism she had witnessed in that hellish classroom. They were more than just survivors, Zara realized. They were a testament to the indomitable spirit of life, to the power of unity in the face of adversity. And as she looked to the future, Zara knew that this was just the beginning. The galaxy was vast and full of wonders, and she was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. For she was human, a Deathworlder and a survivor, and that was a legacy worth living for. The end.